Hello everyone, and welcome to the very first official episode of Webcomic Wednesdays. Hi everyone, it's Maddie, and welcome back to my channel. Thanks so much for joining me here today. This is I guess it's like the first official episode, because there was an intro episode last week on this new series that I'm working on that's Webcomic Wednesdays. I was writing down how many webcomics I read, and I think I have like 14 right now, but I also just binged a new one over the weekend, so chances are this series is definitely going to be going on for at least a couple months, which I'm very excited about. So today we're going to be talking about the very first webcomic that I ever read, which is called Gunnerkrigg Court, and it is by Tom Siddell. I will link the comic down below so that you can go to the website and give it a gander if you'd like. I don't know who says that word. So Gunnerkrigg Court is I guess technically I would kind of classify it as fantasy, but it definitely has some elements of sci-fi to it. So it follows the main character, and I think I'm pronouncing this right, antimony? It's like one of those words, you know, when you read and your brain just like skips over it, and I'm like, I know she's named after the element, I just don't really know how to pronounce it. But anyways, she's the main character of the series, and she moves to attend this new school in Gunnerkrigg Court, which is where the name of it comes from. So essentially the way that the world is kind of developed is like there's the court here, and there's like this bridge to like the forest. And the forest is where like a lot more of like the mystical magical elements and everything happen. And that's where I guess kind of like the antagonist of the series, who is named Coyote, and he kind of reminds me a lot, just in the way that he's drawn and stylized, of a lot of traditional First Nations legends, or at least the ones that I know, especially because coyotes kind of end up being seen as like tricksters. Like he almost gives me a bit of Nanabush vibes, which might mean nothing to you if you're not First Nations or know kind of some of the lore and legends that come with that. So the forest is ruled by these like mythical creatures, so there's like fairies and nymphs and everyone who's living over there. And then the court itself is very much more logical and like science-y driven. So as the story develops, it follows Antimony and her best friend Kat, who I believe they end up being roommates in the first year, and that's how they meet each other, but I could be wrong, as well as a whole plethora of other characters. This is, I think, going to be one of the trickiest webcomics for me to give you a spiel about, because it has been going on for so long and there's so much that's happened. I don't want to spoil any major plot points, but also the story has developed so much from the beginning. One of the things that I think is really interesting reading webcomics is a lot of the times if they go on for a really long time, you get to watch the style change. So I'll probably put pictures up here, but what the characters look like in the first issue opposed to what they look like now has changed so much, but when you're reading it you don't really pick up on it because it's very like subtle the way that it evolves as they grow up. And then all of a sudden I remember the first time I went back to reread it, I was like, that was what she looked like? I don't remember that whatsoever. So I started reading Gunnerkrigg Court when I think I was in grade 7. One of my friends was really into a couple different webcomic series, and this was one of the ones that she really liked. So she showed it to me, and I binge read it because I have a serious problem with that with webcomic series, and I absolutely loved it. It updates Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, which is a pretty good schedule for a webcomic, and it's one page each day. And then every once in a while there'll be like 2 weeks off, but there's always like some content. Usually it's like this little city pigeon talking to you about stuff that fills in the gaps in that time period. I think when I looked last night it's over 2,500 pages, but obviously when you're reading a graphic novel it doesn't feel like that. One of the things with this webcomic that I struggle with a lot of webcomics is, as much as I love the regular updates, sometimes I find it difficult to like maintain the flow of the story when you're getting like one page every single week. When I get graphic novels from like the library or something like that, I usually like binge read, like I read them in one sitting or like in 2 sittings or something like that, because I just like getting the story all at once. I'm the same with books. I don't normally take that long to read a book. So sometimes what I end up doing, and I've done multiple times with Gunnerkrigg Court, is I've kind of like left and let it like stack up a bunch of readings and then come back to it. Of course, sometimes that backfires because if I wait too long to come back to it, then I don't remember where we were in the story in the first place. But sometimes it's nice to be able to revisit it from the beginning and go through all of it again. I know the very first time that I reread it from the beginning, I was like, wow, I forgot like how much different things, that's good English, how much different things, how many different things happened over the course of the story so far. What to tell you about this without spoiling it? Let's talk about characters. My favorite character in the series is Renard, and he is this, I don't know if his creature has like a particular name, but essentially what happens is he's bound to antimony. I swear, every time I say that name, it sounds wrong to me. If there are any sciencey people, I'm sorry. And he kind of starts out as like being really petty and upset about it, and then like as the story evolves, their kind of friendship grows, and the knowledge that he's able to bring to her experiences and the experiences of the people around her are really interesting, especially with Kat. Him and Kat have this really heartfelt conversation about love and relationships, which is really candid. And that's one thing to not spoil. Okay, I might spoil it. But there is kind of coming out narratives written into the story, and there's a lot of different diverse characters, and the ways that they look at love and relationships is really interesting, especially because they don't limit it to like the human creatures in the story, which is one of my favorite things. One of my favorite kind of side plots, I guess you would call it, is this relationship between Robot and Shadow, which one is a robot and one is a shadow, shockingly, and how they both kind of accidentally stumble into being a part of Antimony and Kat's life, and then they slowly start to spend more and more time with each other, and their relationship evolves from there. I think that's one of the things about how long this story is that it's able to take so many characters and give them time to like flush out their background and what's going on with them. There's this little ghost who shows up at one point, and we get his whole backstory, but then we find out his backstory is like interwoven with one of the teachers that keeps showing up over and over again. So that's really unique. We get enough time to delve into Antimony's past and what happened to her mom, and then her dad reappears later in the story, and we get to follow that progression as well as the other friends and people that she has around her at that time period. And there's also this really interesting kind of dichotomy and narrative that goes between having such a sharp divide between the court and the forest, and whether or not that's the really right thing to do, and whether there are people in the court who belong more in the forest, and whether there should be different divides there. Another one of my favorite characters in the series is Yesergen, who is this wolf. And that's another name I have never said out loud, so I might be saying wrong. But he is this wolf who essentially is kind of like Coyote's right-hand man. And Coyote treats him like garbage, but the fact is that like the power and kind of the ability that Coyote gives him keeps Yesergen being so close to him. And there's a lot of really interesting things that get discussed about that relationship. I think if I had to boil it down to what my favorite thing about this comic is, it is the relationships and the fact that it doesn't limit conversations about relationships to purely romantic. It looks at the bonds between friendships and the bonds that kind of go beyond friendship and the people that we have in our life that we have deemed as like, this is someone important who I want around me forever, and how those can be negative things, how those can be positive things, and how we help each other get through these really difficult times. The art is really fascinating, the writing is really well done, it's very playful in some ways and then very serious in other ways, so it often goes back and forth between giving you a bit of that balance. I know on my like iPad that's dying that I've had for years, I have a bunch of screenshots of pages and that really meant a lot to me and that stuck with me. So if I had to give you a final sales pitch for this story, I think what I would say is if you're someone who loves fantasy and world building, this is definitely a story for you because it's very well done in that way. If you're someone who wants to see unique relationships and friendships in the way that they grow, I would highly recommend reading that story as well. And if you're someone who's just interested in kind of the worlds of magic and mythology, there's a lot that they pull from to create this story as well. It's still going on. I don't know if there is a necessary end in sight or if it's just going to keep continuing. I was flicking back through it to try and get caught up before I did this video, but I still have a little bit more reading to do. So I think that's everything that I have to say about this. I feel like I'm missing a lot. I think this one is going to be less of my impassioned reactions, just because it's something that I have been reading for so long. Not that it's like mellowed out my reaction to it, but I'm not in that like freak out stage when I read it. And also, as much as it's like one of my favorites and it has a huge place in my life because it's one of the first things that introduced me to reading webcomics, I would definitely rank it probably in my top 5, but it's not one of like my all-time favorites that I'm like, oh, I have to constantly be checking up on it. It kind of like comes and goes in my life in waves. Whereas I think when I'm gonna start like circulating in some of the ones that I just read, you might see me lose my mind a little bit because I was doing that with the one I was reading this week. So yeah, I'm going to wrap it up there. This video ended up being a little bit longer than I thought it was going to be, but that is the very first webcomic recommendation that I have for you guys that I think you should go and check out if you're interested in it. I also know that the author does YouTube videos where he's like gone back and kind of talked about what his thoughts were when he was creating some of the earlier chapters, so that's something really unique that you can check out as well if you like. Besides that, I will see you guys next Wednesday for another episode of this series, and I'm also working on having another booktube themed video coming your way soon, as well as my February plan with me for my bullet journal. If you want to follow me on Goodreads or Instagram, all that lovely stuff is linked below. And like, subscribe, ring that bell if you want to get notifications, and I will see you next time.